In 480 BC, 2 million Persian soldiers marched toward a narrow mountain pass that 300 Spartans had decided to defend alone. The pass at Thermopylae was only 15 meters wide, at its narrowest point a bottleneck that turned numbers into an irrelevant advantage. King Xerxes commanded the largest army ever assembled in human history, and he expected to walk through Greece like water through sand. 300 Spartans stood in that pass, knowing they would never leave it, and history remembers what happened over those 3 days. Historians estimate 2 million soldiers, 5,000 ships, and enough supplies to feed an empire marched behind Xerxes toward those 300 men. Leonidas, king of Sparta, had been told by the oracle he would die here, and he came anyway because that is what Spartans did. But what if on the night before the battle something appeared in the sky above the hot gates that no Greek had any word for? 2 United States Army Apache helicopters armed with Hellfire missiles, 30mm cannons, and enough firepower to rewrite an entire ancient battle. The Spartan sentries heard the sound first, a mechanical thunder unlike any storm they had ever experienced coming from the dark horizon. This is the story of what happens when the most lethal attack helicopter ever built arrives at the most famous last stand in history. The hot gates earned their name from the sulfur springs nearby, and from the heat of battle that had made them legendary forever. A Persian scout reported flying metal demons above the pass, but Xerxes dismissed his account as the fear of an unworthy soldier. Inside the Apache cockpit, the pilot looked at his targeting display and saw the largest concentration of soldiers in the ancient world below. Each Apache carried 16 Hellfire missiles, a 30mm cannon with 1,200 rounds, enough to engage targets nobody in 480 BC could reach. The 2 pilots circled above the pass and assessed the battlefield the way pilots are trained to assess it, with complete clinical detachment. Leonidas met the Apache pilots on the ground the night before battle and communicated through gestures and basic shared words for 30 minutes. He walked around the aircraft 3 times, touching the rotor blades, studying the weapons pods with the analytical eye of a professional soldier. He returned to his warriors and briefed them, simply pointing at the sky and then pointing at the Persian army, explaining the new plan. The plan was simple: Spartans hold the narrow pass and draw Persian infantry into the killing ground while the Apaches covered the flanks. The pilot briefed his gunner on ammunition conservation. They had enough for sustained combat, but a 2 million man army required careful planning. Xerxes commanded Immortals, the finest infantry in the Persian Empire, 1,000 elite soldiers who had never lost a battle in their existence. The Immortals were called immortal because whenever one fell, another took his place, immediately maintaining a constant strength of exactly 10,000 men. Persian cavalry numbered 40,000 riders, a force that could sweep around any conventional flank and destroy supply lines within hours of deployment. Persian archers were so numerous that their arrow volleys famously blocked the sun, a fact that reportedly made Spartan soldier Dionysus laugh. Dionysus reportedly said, "Then we will fight in the shade," and that line captured everything essential about how Spartans approached impossible odds. The Apache pilot heard this story from an interpreter, smiled inside his helmet, and noted quietly that shade would not be a problem today. Dawn broke over the hot gates, with the Persian army forming assault columns, a sight that had broken the nerve of every army before. The Spartans performed their traditional pre-battle rituals, combing their long hair and preparing their weapons calmly because death held no fear for them. At first light, the 2 Apaches lifted off from their overnight position behind the Greek lines and took up station above the pass. On the Apache targeting display, the Persian army appeared as an ocean of heat signatures stretching from the mountains to the sea in every direction. The Persian drums began, and 2 million soldiers started their advance toward the narrow pass where 300 Spartans stood waiting calmly. The ground shook from the footsteps of 2 million soldiers, and the sound reached the Spartan position like distant thunder before the storm. Leonidas raised his spear, and 300 Spartan spears rose in response, and the most famous last stand in history was about to change. The Apache pilot placed his targeting reticle on the lead Persian formation and waited for the moment that would rewrite ancient history forever. For 30 seconds, nothing happened, and those 30 seconds were the last moment that the ancient world still made sense to everyone present. The first Hellfire missile hit the center of the lead Persian formation, and the explosion that followed was unlike anything the ancient world had seen. The explosion was not like a catapult stone or an arrow. It arrived without warning from above, and nothing in the ancient world explained it. Soldiers nearest the impact scattered in every direction, breaking the careful formation that Persian commanders had drilled them to maintain under any fire. The second missile hit a different section of the column, and the chaos spread wider as Persian commanders struggled to understand the source. Persian commanders looked up and saw the Apache helicopter and had no framework in any language or religion to explain what they were looking at. A Persian soldier pointed at the Apache, and his mouth formed the shapes of words, but no word in his language fit what he saw. Xerxes watched his lead formation collapse from two impacts he could not explain and felt his first moment of genuine uncertainty in this campaign. The Apache gunner opened the 30mm cannon, and the tracer rounds cut through the Persian formation faster than any archer could comprehend. Persian archers attempted to engage the helicopter with their famous composite bows, but the Apache flew at an altitude no arrow could ever reach. The maximum range of a Persian composite bow was approximately 300 meters. The Apache engaged from 800 meters, making it completely untouchable. A Persian cavalry commander decided the answer was speed, ordering 40,000 cavalry to charge the pass at full gallop, ignoring the aircraft above. 40,000 horses at full gallop created a sound and a sight that had broken every army those cavalry had ever charged before today. The Apache pilot pivoted toward the cavalry and selected his anti-personnel munitions, choosing rounds that would maximize effectiveness against a spread formation. The maximum range of a Persian composite bow was approximately 300 meters, while the Apache engaged from 800 meters, making it untouchable. 40,000 horses that had never been exposed to helicopter fire panicked simultaneously, and the cavalry charge became a disaster for the Persian army. The cavalry disaster cost Xerxes more soldiers than the Spartans had killed in the entire historical three-day battle, and no arrow had been fired. Leonidas watched the cavalry collapse from his position, and the Spartan standing beside him exchanged the closest thing to surprise a Spartan ever showed. A Spartan warrior nodded slowly toward the sky, then toward the falling Persians, and that single nod represented the highest possible Spartan praise. Xerxes called an emergency council, his generals rushing to the royal tent, while outside the Persian army stood leaderless and deeply confused. His generals argued, some claiming divine intervention, others suggesting unknown Greek weapons, and Xerxes listened to every explanation. He found none of them satisfying. A Persian cavalry commander decided the answer was speed, ordering his 40,000 cavalry to charge the pass at full gallop, ignoring the aircraft. Xerxes dismissed the priests impatiently. He was a practical commander, and he needed a military solution, not a theological one, to this problem. Inside the Apache, the pilot reviewed his resources. He had expended 4 Hellfire missiles and approximately 300 cannon rounds in the opening engagement. He communicated with his wingman. They had enough missiles and cannon rounds to sustain the engagement, but would need to be precise about targeting. Xerxes sent his Immortals forward, 10,000 elite soldiers in their famous golden masks, marching in perfect formation toward the pass deliberately. The cavalry disaster cost Xerxes more soldiers than the Spartans had killed in the entire historical three-day battle, with no arrows fired. The Apache pilot made a tactical decision. He would allow some Immortals to enter the narrow pass where the Spartans could engage them directly. The Immortals entered the narrow pass and met the Spartan phalanx, and for a moment the battle became purely ancient with no modern intervention. For 8 minutes, the Spartans fought the Immortals alone in the narrow pass and demonstrated exactly why they were considered the greatest warriors alive. The Immortals pushed into the pass with superior numbers, and the Spartans pushed them back, because in 15 meters width numbers become irrelevant. The Apache hovered above, waiting, watching the battle below, with a professional eye looking for the moment when intervention would be necessary. Leonidas fought in the center of the phalanx, as Spartan tradition required. A king did not command from distance, he died with his men. But then something strange happened. The immortal commander found a path on the cliffside, a narrow route above the pass that could bypass it. A Hellfire missile hit the center of the tallest siege tower in seconds, and Persian engineers understood immediately that this particular approach would not succeed. On the Apache thermal display, the pilot saw the flanking column immediately, their heat signatures glowing clearly as they climbed in the darkness. The Apache pivoted toward the cliff, and the flanking column of Immortals found themselves targeted by a weapon they had absolutely no knowledge of. A Hellfire missile hit the cliff face above the flanking column, causing a rock slide that blocked the narrow path and stopped the entire maneuver. Generals from Persia, Egypt, Babylon, India, and across the empire debated how to defeat a weapon none of them had any prior experience with. They looked up and saw the Apache hovering directly above them, and several soldiers later reported that they heard the voice of a god speaking. Several Immortals on the cliff path began lowering their weapons in the closest thing to surrender that Immortals had ever been recorded doing. Xerxes received the report his Immortals had been neutralized on the flanking path, not by soldiers, but by rocks falling from the sky deliberately. The Immortals had existed for 20 years, and in 20 years they had never failed to complete an assigned mission until this particular day. Xerxes sent a messenger under flag of truce to the Spartan position, asking through diplomatic channels about the nature of the flying weapons. The Persian messenger approached the Spartan position with the flag of truce, and the Spartans watched him come with complete calm professionalism. Leonidas received the messenger and listened to Xerxes' question about the origin of the flying machines and considered his answer for a moment. Leonidas replied simply, "They are Spartan allies, that is everything you need to know," and then he dismissed the messenger back to Xerxes. The pilot and wingman discussed the mathematics of the engagement. They could sustain operations for several more days, but attrition was a genuine concern. Xerxes began planning a different kind of assault, something that could neutralize the aircraft or at least draw it away from the pass long enough. The critical constraint was not ammunition, but fuel. The Apaches carried limited flight hours, and replacement fuel simply did not exist in 480 BC. The smoke screens created genuine thermal interference on the Apache targeting display, reducing visibility and forcing the pilot to fly lower than optimal. Flying lower through the smoke reduced the Apache's tactical advantage and increased its vulnerability to any Persian weapons that could reach at lower altitude. Persian archers positioned under the smoke cover, waiting for the Apache to fly low enough for a coordinated maximum range volley to have any effect. 3,000 archers fired simultaneously, and the arrow cloud that resulted was genuinely impressive, but the Apache's speed made targeting almost impossible. Several arrows struck the Apache fuselage, causing minor damage to exterior sensors, but no structural damage, and the helicopter remained fully combat capable. In Athens, citizens debated the accounts from Thermopylae, some believing the stories, while others insisted the descriptions were exaggerated by frightened retreating soldiers. Xerxes watched his archers fire their maximum volley and watched arrows bounce off the flying machine and understood that bows were not the answer. Persian engineers began constructing tall siege towers not to attack walls but to attempt to reach helicopter altitude, a completely unprecedented ancient engineering goal. The pilot observed the siege tower construction from altitude and communicated to his wingman that Persian engineering response to helicopter was genuinely creative. Xerxes sent Leonidas another message offering any explanation for the flying machines in exchange for peacefully abandoning the pass and withdrawing the Spartan position. The first siege tower reached 12 meters height before the Apache pilot made the tactical decision that the towers needed to be addressed. A single Hellfire missile destroyed the tallest siege tower in seconds, and the Persian engineers understood immediately that this approach would not succeed. The engineers looked at the destroyed tower, then at the aircraft above them, and the specific expression on their faces needed no translation at all. That night, Xerxes gathered every military mind in his empire for an emergency council, the most impressive collection of tactical knowledge the ancient world possessed. Persian priests worked through the night, writing theological explanations for the helicopter, attempting to fit this impossible aircraft into their existing religious divine framework. One advisor suggested luring the helicopters into a narrow mountain gorge where their maneuverability would be restricted by terrain on all sides. Another advisor suggested simultaneous mass fire from enough archers to create a genuine physical barrier of arrows through which nothing could safely pass. Xerxes listened carefully to every plan. He was not a fool, he was a strategist who had conquered half the known world through intelligent adaptation. Greek philosophers who heard accounts from Thermopylae began questioning whether the gods themselves had taken sides and what that might ultimately mean for humanity. The pilot and wingman discussed the mathematics of the engagement. They could sustain operations for several more days, but attrition was a genuine concern. The critical constraint was not ammunition, but fuel. The Apaches carried enough for limited hours of flight, and fuel did not exist in 480 BC. The pilot made the command decision to enter conservation mode at night, reducing fuel consumption while maintaining full operations during Persian assault periods. The Spartans maintained their positions through the night, keeping watch in shifts the way soldiers have always maintained positions before deciding battles. Dawn of the second day revealed that Persian reinforcements had arrived overnight, bringing Xerxes' total force to an even larger number than before. Leonidas observed the reinforcements, noted their numbers, and updated his understanding of the tactical situation without showing any reaction to the scale. The Apache pilot reviewed his second-day tactical plan, adjusting targeting priorities based on what he had learned about Persian tactical patterns the day before. Throughout the Persian camp, soldiers who had witnessed the helicopter told increasingly elaborate stories, the aircraft becoming something beyond human in each retelling. Each nation represented in Xerxes' army interpreted the helicopter through their own religious and cultural framework. No two interpretations were the same. Egyptian soldiers in the Persian army believed the helicopter was a manifestation of Horus, the falcon-headed god, sent to oppose Xerxes' divine ambitions. Babylonian soldiers attempted to record the helicopter on clay tablets with careful observations because their culture valued precise documentation of unusual phenomena. Indian soldiers from the eastern edges of Xerxes' empire recognized the helicopter as a vimana, the flying vehicles described in their sacred ancient texts. Persian priests worked through the night writing theological explanations for the helicopter, attempting to fit the impossible into their existing divine framework. News of the flying machines at Thermopylae spread to Greek city-states, and the philosophical debate that followed occupied Greek thinkers for decades. Greek philosophers who heard accounts of Thermopylae began questioning whether the gods themselves had taken sides, and what the implications of that might be. His visor reflected the ancient Greek landscape below, and the pilot who had flown in modern wars felt something genuinely different about defending this place. Herodotus, the father of history, would later struggle with accounts of the flying machines at Thermopylae, unsure whether to record them as fact. Xerxes sent Leonidas another message offering any explanation for the flying machines that Leonidas desired in exchange for abandoning the pass peacefully. Leonidas read the offer, considered it briefly, and sent back a response that was characteristically Spartan in both its brevity and its content. Leonidas had written 2 words, molon lab cum, and take it the same words he had said about his weapons, and they applied equally here. Xerxes crumpled the scroll, then smoothed it out and read it again, and then laughed because a man who responds like that deserves respect. He stood looking at the pass for a long time, and his advisors recognized the silence of a man who is genuinely revising something fundamental. There are things in human history that cannot be conquered by numbers or by weapons, and Xerxes was beginning to understand he had found one. Between Persian assaults, the Apache pilots flew patrol above the ancient landscape, looking down at a world 800 years older than anything they knew. The pilot looked down at the ancient world below him: farms, olive groves, small harbors, fishing boats, a civilization at the beginning of everything. His visor reflected the ancient Greek landscape, and the pilot who had flown in modern wars felt something genuinely different about defending this particular place. The 2 pilots sat on their aircraft skids eating rations, watching the sunset over ancient Greek mountains that no modern person had ever seen. The Apaches brought the most advanced firepower the 21st century could produce, but Thermopylae already possessed something that firepower cannot manufacture. A Spartan warrior standing in the pass and an Apache pilot hovering above it shared the same fundamental thing: a decision not to leave. A Spartan warrior standing in the pass and an Apache pilot hovering above shared the same fundamental thing, which was a decision not to leave. Courage does not require understanding what you face, it only requires deciding whether you will stand or step back from what faces you. The largest army in ancient history could not overcome a decision 2 forces from 2 different centuries had made simultaneously about the same 15 meters. Xerxes looked at the pass on the 3rd day and understood for the first time that what he was facing was not a military problem. Some positions are not defended by weapons, they are defended by the simple and total decision of the people who chose to stand there. Against the mountains that had witnessed this battle, the Apache helicopter and the Spartan warrior were equally small and equally necessary for the same reason. In both versions of this battle, the outcome that truly mattered was not the tactical result, but the idea that 300 men said no. Leonidas looked at his Spartans on the final day of the engagement, and no words were exchanged because none were needed between these men. The question Thermopylae asks across every century is not about the weapons involved, but about the decision that brought any particular defender there. The hot gates remain what they had always been: a narrow place where the question of who you are matters more than what you carry. In this alternate timeline, Xerxes withdrew from Thermopylae, giving Greek civilization the time it needed to organize the defense that preserved Western history. Athens survived, and the Greek Golden Age that followed produced philosophy, democracy, theater, mathematics, and science that shaped every civilization that came after it. The Apache pilots prepared for departure on the final night, and the Spartans stood with torches watching the machines that had fought beside them. The Apaches lifted off from the pass, and the Spartans raised their spears in salute, crossing every single century between those 2 moments. The Apaches lifted off from the pass, and the Spartans raised their spears in salute, and that gesture crossed every century between those 2 moments. Herodotus wrote his Thermopylae account and struggled for the first time in his career to find adequate words for what he had recorded. Herodotus wrote his account of this Thermopylae and struggled for the first time in his career to find words adequate for what he was recording. The Spartans came to Thermopylae to die for something, and the Apaches came from the future to make sure that something was worth dying for.